Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Rosendo Santiago was sitting in his office, leaning his aching, stiff back against the soft sofa. The surgery lasted more than 6 hours. At first, everyone thought that the guy, who was admitted here with a terrible stab wound, simply would not survive. However, Rosendo was a professional and didn't let that happen. Santiago was considered a top professional for a reason. He was one of the very few professionals in the country who dared to work with the most difficult cases. In this case, according to all the risk indicators, the possibility of saving the patient was almost zero. He lost too much blood and too much time on the way to the hospital. But Santiago not only managed to save the guy's life, he also managed to sew up the wound in such a way that the scar from it would not make him ugly, but on the contrary, it would make him look more brutal. While playing a reconstructors battle, depicting medieval sword fights, the patient fell on his own weapon, almost with his face. The guy's neck and right cheek were severely injured. It was a miracle that his arteries and nerves were not injured by the blade of the saber. The ambulance specialists who brought the role player to the private clinic where Santiago worked understood perfectly well doctors in a public free hospital would not be able to help the boy in time. In medical circles, Rosendo was almost a legend, and therefore the medical staff could only hope that the surgeon will be able to make another miracle. And he succeeded. However, people couldn't even imagine how hard it was for a genius surgeon to make such miracles. Rosendo was only 47, but sometimes he felt like 100 years old when he was dealing with a really difficult case. The man invested not only his professional skills, but also absolutely all his moral strength in saving such patients. That's why sometimes they called him an archangel, alluding to a certain mystical power that was in the hands of the surgeon at the moment when he approached another severe patient. Santiago fought for every human life to the end and never paid any attention to the financial situation of patients. He wasn't interested in money, he was only interested in saving lives, and there were more opportunities to save people in a private clinic. Rosendo couldn't remember how many people he had saved, but it was hundreds. In addition, he often organized lectures regarding first aid in extreme situations for members of the rescue services. His colleagues respected Santiago for this and were amazed at his efficiency. If it was necessary, the surgeon could stay in the clinic 24 hours a day, monitoring the condition of a patient. However, this didn't mean that Rosendo was some kind of living robot. On the contrary, his emotional side was developed no worse than his intellectual side. Therefore, he was always incredibly worried about people whose lives depended entirely on his medical interventions. He got his love for medicine from his parents. Santiago's parents both worked as doctors in a regional hospital, and his father also participated in various special operations in the war zone as a field doctor. Rosendo's father and mother have worked as doctors all their lives. Laurencia Flores, Rosendo's mother, spent half her life working as a plastic surgeon in a public hospital. She corrected the defects that people receive due to various injuries or due to genetic changes in their bodies when genetics suddenly played a bad joke on people and had an extremely negative impact on their appearance. Laurencia Flores worked until she was diagnosed with arthritis of the wrist joints. Every day it was more and more difficult for her to hold surgical instruments in her hands. She couldn't risk the patient's health and life. Therefore, she retired immediately after she was diagnosed with such a disappointing diagnosis. Santiago has always admired and respected his parents. So no one was surprised when, after school, he also decided to tie his life to medicine. Fortunately, his father and mother always taught their son the right concepts and moral values from childhood. In particular, the ability to respect and value any human life, regardless of how much money was in the pocket. This approach determined the young Rosendo's attitude toward money. He never focused on wealth or material prosperity. The guy was quite happy with what he had. Young Santiago learned not to categorize patients into the poor and the rich. Even when help was needed for the homeless, Rosendo always came to the rescue and never treated poor people with contempt. This approach was somewhat shocking to his colleagues at the time. Santiago, who initially worked in a public city hospital, didn't care much for the hospital director's opinion when homeless patients without IDs were brought to the hospital in the middle of the night. Sometimes the ambulance brought dirty, smelly homeless people to the hospital, but it didn't stop Rosendo. He did everything possible to help these people and to make sure that they left the hospital absolutely healthy. And the reproaches of the hospital director didn't bother him. The hospital staff didn't like Santiago because Rosendo never took bribes. This man had his personal code of honor, where this rule was engraved. He had seen too many cases when rich parents of young, reckless children literally shoveled huge bundles of money into the hands of the doctor and some other medical professionals just to save their children after another overdose. Or on the contrary, they wanted to buy a place in the queue for the transplant of vital organs, while others, ordinary people, had to wait for years. All of this caused Santiago to have an unconcealed disgust. But the doctors who did not hesitate to take these bribes, prioritizing one life over another, were even more despicable in his eyes. One day the surgeon expressed everything he thought to an old acquaintance and former colleague who had been in private practice for several years. He invited Rosendo for a cup of coffee and listened to his opinion about corrupt specialists. "That's what it's like, Venancio," Rosendo complained to a friend about his colleagues. "And you know what is the saddest thing? That such cases exist in almost every hospital. And we work in the capital. We have to provide the best possible services so that people have the best possible experience. But in reality, it turns out that those who have money have a better chance of survival, and often doctors value one life more than another. I'm ashamed of them and I can't understand them." "It's easy to understand them, Rosendo." Venancio smiled sadly. "The explanation is simple. They're not interested in saving life. All they want is money. I mean, you know yourself that the salaries in public hospitals are low. That's why I became a private doctor. I had to get a loan to start a private practice, but I had no choice. The equipment alone cost several million, and I also had to rent the premises and pay taxes. It's difficult, but I have no regrets." The men chatted about modern healthcare for a while, and then his former colleague unexpectedly offered Santiago to work at his clinic. Rosendo was quite surprised by such an offer. "I don't know, Venancio," Santiago hesitated. "Working in a private clinic is not quite the same as working in a public hospital. I mean, you have more strict rules and higher standards. I'm not sure I'm good enough for that level." Venancio only smiled slyly at his friend. "Yes, the standards are higher, you're right about that. But you have an excellent education and reputation. The whole capital has already heard about your achievements. It's not right when such a talented doctor works for a miserable salary in a public hospital with horrible coworkers. Believe me, our working day is no different from the way you work now. The only difference is that patients know where they're going and that they have to pay to visit us. That's why there are no bribes. They already paid for the services. But in general, it's the same patients, the same problems. But we have excellent equipment, no shortage of medications, and good patient care." Rosendo shook his head hesitantly. "What about the ordinary people, who can't pay for this?" Venancio bowed his head understandingly while slicing the cake on a white plate. "Honestly, ordinary patients rarely come to us. However," and he put a piece of dessert in his mouth, taking a big gulp of dark-flavored drink, "our clinic has a special quota for such cases. For example, if other hospitals are full, or there's a risk that the patient won't get to another hospital in time, the ambulances take patients to our clinic. They don't have to pay for anything. We can do something good without burdening people financially." "Interesting philosophy," Santiago said. "Rosendo, think about it for a week. If you are ready to join our team, call me. I'll leave you my business card. We really need people like you. I guarantee you a good income and great working conditions. Your talent should be helping people, not slowly dying in a public hospital. And your medical intuition is unique, believe me. It'd be a sin if you wasted your talent working in a rotten hospital for years." Later, Santiago often thought back to that conversation. Venancio was right. If he had not joined a private clinic at that time, his professionalism would have simply faded away. Indeed, it could have happened that the young surgeon could spend the best years of his working life in endless disputes with the corrupt managers of the city hospital. Not so long ago, the man saw a big report on the internet devoted to the termination of this evil institution and the arrest of its director. So once again, Rosendo's intuition didn't fail him. It turned out that for several years the head of the city hospital illegally sold donor organs taken from deceased patients without the consent of their relatives. When the face of his former boss appeared on TV, Santiago even shuddered in disgust. Now Rosendo successfully worked in his friend's clinic for more than 15 years, and all this time he occasionally treated ordinary citizens. Moreover, absolutely free of charge. Venancio didn't lie to him in this part of the agreement. There was indeed a quota, and Santiago was lucky to save many good people free of charge. While Rosendo was more than successful professionally, his personal life, unfortunately, was exactly the opposite. His wife Olga left the surgeon 5 years ago when it became impossible to hide her numerous infidelities from her husband. Working as a PR manager in a big media holding, Olga often helped the director of the clinic, Venancio, with the preparation of advertising and press conferences that could once again raise the prestige of his institution in society. At first, Rosendo was even happy about his wife's initiative. The more sponsors and patrons they could attract, the greater the quota became, so Santiago could save more ordinary people. However, trouble came unexpectedly. Very soon Rosendo began to notice that his wife stayed for too long at business meetings and so-called business lunches. The woman began to come home very late, and sometimes she didn't come home at all. Her husband had no idea where his wife spent the nights, but he noticed that sometimes she would come home drunk in the morning. Olga answered all questions in the same way. "I was busy." Or she would answer, "Darling, there was such a complicated meeting, it was horrible. So me and the girls from the financial department went to the cafe to relax a bit. I only had a couple of drinks." It lasted for 3 years, during which Rosendo had to endure the regular absence of his wife and, as a consequence, the absence of hot dinners. Everything was solved quite unexpectedly. One day the surgeon was on shift after another long sleepless night. Olga was not at home at the time, and her phone kept telling Rosendo in an answering machine voice that his wife was not available at the moment. As he walked through the physiotherapy department, he suddenly heard a familiar voice coming from the staff room. Hearing the sounds of laughter and kissing, Rosendo was shocked when he recognized his wife's voice. Santiago quickly walked to the staff room and swung the door open with a sharp movement. The first thing that caught the surgeon's eye was a glass coffee table with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses on it. A plate of cheese slices and an open box of chocolates was next to it. There were lipstick marks on one of the glasses, and Santiago knew this color very well. "Rosendo, what are you doing here?" He heard his wife's indignant scream the next second. The surgeon slowly looked up at his half-naked wife, covering herself shamefully with a white medical uniform. A young physiotherapist, confused by the situation, was sitting next to her. Rosendo sometimes met with him in the dining room and discussed the latest news from the world of sports. Both men were very fond of soccer and hockey. The guy shamefully lowered his eyes, as it was pointless to say anything and to justify himself in this situation. "What am I doing here?" "Olga, actually, Nicolau and I," he nodded towards the physiotherapist, "we both work here." "But what are you doing here with him?" "Nicolau, why are you silent like a fish?" Olga shoved her numb lover with her shoulder. "Tell him something." "Rosendo, I'm sorry. But actually, Olga and I have been seeing each other for a long time, we just didn't want to disturb you. You have enough problems at this job, every day is so stressful." The physiotherapist hesitantly reached for his shirt, trying to button it with trembling fingers. Rosendo only grinned bitterly. "Every day is stressful," he repeated the boy's last words. "That's for sure. Nicolau, get ready for work. Because your boss is about to arrive, he shouldn't see you like this. Olga, we'll talk at home, and please be on time tonight." Having said this, Rosendo silently left the staff room under the gloomy gaze of his cheating wife, allowing her and her lover to dress up without prying eyes. In the evening, an unpleasant conversation awaited the couple at home. To Olga's great disappointment, Rosendo didn't make any dramatic scenes or scandals. The man only wanted to find out why his wife suddenly decided that she would be better with someone else. Of course, he was insanely offended and hurt. Still, betrayal hurts a lot anyway. Why? Don't you have any idea why? His wife asked in a mocking tone. Sometimes it seems to me that you don't care whether I'm home or not. You are focused on your work and do not notice anything around you, and I needed your attention, you know? I am not even talking about love. Fuck it. You don't even know if you love me. You never knew that. But could you at least remember that it was our wedding anniversary last week? I'm not quite old yet, Rosendo. You just stopped noticing me. But Nicolau helped me to feel feminine again, to feel beautiful, desirable. Do you know that we've been together for 3 years? Santiago felt an icy coldness seize his clasped hands. He slowly raised his eyes to Olga. 3 years? He asked in a hoarse voice. And you've been silent all this time? But why, Olga? Why? His wife only waved her blonde hair unhappily. Because I waited until the last minute to see if you would suspect something, if you would be jealous. After all, I hoped that we could still have a baby. The woman quickly wiped a single tear from her cheek. But you're probably infertile. You've lost your health because of your work. You've stopped thinking not only about me, but even about yourself. The topic of children has always been sensitive for Santiago. The couple tried to have a child for almost 20 years, but nothing worked out. Even IVF, which Olga underwent 4 times, did not help. The woman kept blaming her husband for what happened, hinting at the man's inability to have children. However, the surgeon was examined many times, but no problems were found. As for Olga, she categorically denied the idea that there could be anything wrong with her. Her tests also showed nothing special. So there was something else causing the couple's childlessness. Have you ever thought that you couldn't have children just because there might be a trivial physiological incompatibility between you? A doctor who was examining Rosendo once asked him, "What do you mean?" The surgeon didn't quite understand. "Do you mean that we are not suitable for each other?" "Not exactly," he said to the anxious man. "You know, sometimes it happens like this. Spouses love each other, but they can't have children. And not because they have some psychological problems, even though this option cannot be excluded, but because their bodies physically do not react to each other in the way that is necessary to produce offspring. It's like nature is telling people that it's better if they don't even try. You know? Nothing good will come out of it anyway. Your body and your wife's body may be set up in completely different ways from the beginning. There's no way to synchronize them." Rosendo left the clinic in deep thought that day. Perhaps there was some sense in what the fertility doctor had said. He and Olga had never really loved each other. And if there was no love, then why should children be born in their family? Rosendo said nothing to his wife about this, and in the evening he listened to another portion of reproaches and dissatisfaction from her. From that moment on, his wife began coming to the clinic frequently under the pretense of working on advertising campaigns and staying overnight in her office more and more often. When Santiago calculated the timeline, he realized that Olga was telling him the truth. Her cheating had been going on for a little over 3 years. "I've made a decision, Santiago," she said in a trembling voice. "Tomorrow I will pack and move in with Nicolau. We'll get divorced as soon as the property division papers are ready. And don't worry, I don't need your summer house. You can keep wasting your time in the vegetable garden every spring." His wife's sharp voice pulled the surgeon back from his memories to the present moment. Rosendo knew that Olga had never been fond of gardening. Therefore, he took what his wife said with a certain dose of irony. "You know, maybe you're right," Rosendo finally said. "We have lived together for so many years, and we have never been happy. Do what you want. I hope that you will find the long-awaited happiness with Nicolau. His wife kept her promise, leaving the very next day. However, she didn't get her long-awaited happiness. A couple of months later, Nicolau quit his job at their clinic for some reason and moved to another city. Olga was the last to know about it. By that time, she and Rosendo had already sold their apartment, and Santiago used the money to buy a nice little apartment not far from the clinic. He gave the car to his ex-wife and now walked to work, believing it was good for his health. After Nicolao's sudden betrayal, Olga tried to reconcile with Rosendo. However, Santiago had no desire to reconcile. As a result, his ex-wife asked her superiors for a transfer to another city to be away from bad memories and try to start the second half of her life from scratch. Rosendo also saw the unexpected divorce as an opportunity to improve his life. Now he was no longer burdened by constant worries about his ex-wife, so he could focus on the work he loved. The immersion in medical work helped Santiago to heal his emotional wound. By saving lives every day, the surgeon seemed to strive to prove to himself that he is still able to bring something good to the world, and that the offense to one woman cannot cross out all the good that still remained in his life. Though sometimes, returning to an empty apartment, Rosendo felt a sharp attack of loneliness and voluntarily sinking into the abyss of memories. Sitting in front of the open window in the evening, the doctor recalled the times of his student youth. That sweet and, at the same time, bitter time when he loved and was loved by a wonderful girl who gave him many joyful and breathtaking moments. However, those times are long gone, and now medical practice was the meaning of his life. The clinic became almost a home for the man, where he spent most of his time. The other half of his time the surgeon preferred to spend with his faithful dog, Chaplin, who became a real emotional support for him. Rosendo found Chaplin when he was a puppy. He found the baby near the dump on his way home from work. The tiny puppy whimpered loudly. It was clear that he had just been born and had just opened his eyes recently, but was left all alone in this cruel world. Santiago felt sorry for the boy, so he decided to shelter him. At first, he had to feed the puppy with milk from a dropper. However, very soon he grew up and began to eat normal dog food, which made life much easier for his ever-busy owner. At work, colleagues often laughed, saying that he finally had a child in his old age, even though this child had a tail and 4 paws. Santiago only joked, "You don't understand anything about life." Now he would have a faithful friend who would not let him be sad. Chaplin grew up to be a robust, good-looking dog with a mottled fur coat and a large fur collar that made him look a bit like a husky breed. His large brown eyes were lined with a black rim. Actually, the dog got his nickname because of this feature, which gave him a resemblance to the American actor Charlie Chaplin. Every evening or morning, depending on Santiago's shifts, the dog greeted the man with joyful barking and wagging of his lush tail. At the same time, Chaplin could sense his owner's mood very well. He always knew when he could ask to play, and when he should be quiet and let the tired surgeon have a rest. Santiago loved his 4-legged companion. They seemed to understand each other without words. They often took long walks in the central city park in their free time. And many other dog owners, seeing them from afar, waved happily, inviting them to join good company. One day, walking around the city with Chaplin on his day off, Santiago witnessed a strange picture. Passing by the bus station, Rosendo noticed a young pregnant girl talking to a cab driver about something. Cab drivers offering their services were lined up in a row along the sidewalk. Santiago would never have looked in the direction of that stranger if it weren't for one fact: the mother-to-be was dressed very poorly, almost in rags. The old blue sweater was badly worn, and the long skirt was just a piece of the cheapest fabric. Her image was worsened even more by old shabby sneakers, obviously found in a dumpster, and different knit socks. She had a small bouquet of carnations in her hands. A gray headscarf on her head protected her from the wind. She tearfully begged one of the cab drivers to take her somewhere, but the surgeon did not hear where exactly. But the drivers responded to all her pleas in the same way. "Young lady, we've given you the price. If you don't have that money, we're not taking you anywhere. Is that clear?" The man with an Oriental accent was annoyed by the insistence of the girl. "But I don't have that much money," she almost sobbed. "Please, I really need to get there. Pretty soon I won't be able to go anywhere at all." The pregnant girl looked at the driver, gently stroking her belly. "Mario, why are you even talking to this bum?" The other driver approached the two people talking. "Don't you understand? Get the hell out of here. Or you don't want to keep your baby?" The girl was shocked by such rudeness and only clapped her huge eyes, nodding affirmatively. "Get out of here." The man threatened her with his fist. Santiago quickly walked toward the pregnant woman, shielding her with his back from the insolent driver. Chaplin barked loudly, causing him to back away. "Hey, dude, what do you want?" "Nothing," Rosendo replied calmly. "Stop threatening the girl, or I'll call the police, and they'll chase all of you away." The driver only raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture, showing that he didn't want any problems. Santiago looked at the pregnant woman, pulled out his wallet from his jacket, and took out some money. Then he handed it to the frightened girl. "Here, take it. I see that you really need to get somewhere. Mario will get you there safely. Right, Mario?" The surgeon looked gloomily at the Oriental-looking driver who had been trying to get rid of the beggar a moment ago. "Yes, sure. I will. Why not? Sit down, girl, and make yourself comfortable." The driver tried to smile weakly, but it looked weird. "Is it really for me?" The pregnant stranger asked Rosendo in surprise. "Oh my goodness, thank you so much. I'll pay you back, I promise. Give me your phone or your address, and I'll give you your money back." "Don't worry about it." The man interrupted her. "I don't need anything from you. It's not that much money to me, but you really need it." The surgeon was surprised at such a sincere expression of gratitude. He helped the girl without expecting anything in return. Sniffing her nose from coming tears, the mother-to-be said in a trembling voice, "Thank you again. Today is a very special day for me, my mom's birthday. So I wanted to give her a present." Embarrassed, she looked her unexpected savior in the eye. She was very young, about 20 years old. Rosendo answered, "You can spend the money on whatever you feel necessary. But please be careful. You should avoid too much emotions in your condition." The girl smiled a little and then got into the cab. Mario had already managed to open the door for her. Santiago and his dog headed off, giving a last warning glance at the cab drivers who remained on the road. On the way home, the surgeon heard his cell phone vibrate insistently in his pocket. When he looked at the display, the man nodded with satisfaction. It was the private investigator he had hired a couple of months ago to find out some information. "Hello, Rosendo. This is Victorino Ferrer from Georgine Detective Agency. Do you have a minute?" "Of course," Santiago said. "To be honest, I didn't expect the results so quickly. Did you find anything?" "I found something very interesting, Rosendo. You can't imagine how much dust I had to swallow in the city archives and how many records I had to go through to find the information you needed. That's why I pay you such a generous payment, Victorino," Santiago responded. "Were you able to find out any specific information?" "Yes, I'll send you the file. Everything you wanted to know is in that file." A second later, the surgeon's smartphone beeped quietly, announcing the arrival of a new email. Opening it, Santiago found a file containing all the information he needed. The results of the investigation were summarized at the very end in a separate spreadsheet. The detective hurriedly voiced the most important thing to his client. "I'm afraid you'll have to go to the cemetery, alley number 8, row 26, grave number 3. That's where she's buried, your first love. She died 20 years ago." Santiago thanked Ferrer and assured him that the rest of the money would be deposited in his account today. Then the surgeon took Chaplin home, fed him, and then rented a car and headed for the cemetery mentioned in the report. The wind was unusually strong that day. Wrapping a scarf over his dark coat, Rosendo wandered through the cemetery, searching among hundreds of gray tombstones for the grave of his only beloved woman. Soon he managed to find the right place. To the surgeon's surprise, the grave of his beloved looked tidy. There were fresh flowers on the grave for some reason. He thought he'd seen this bouquet before. "You? What are you doing here?" A woman's voice sounded not far from Santiago. Turning around, he saw the same pregnant girl to whom he had given money for a cab ride this morning. The girl had a heavy plastic water bottle and a rag in her hands. Obviously, she was going to clean up this particular grave. Santiago felt dizzy. Feeling that the shock was about to come over him like a storm, the man quietly asked the beggar, "Wait, who are you? Who are you to this woman?" The pregnant girl only looked at Rosendo in confusion. Putting the bottle on the ground, she wiped her dirty hands before answering. "This is my mom, Lucrecia Torres. She died 20 years ago when I was 2 or 3 years old. I don't remember exactly. Did you know her?" Only now Santiago noticed how much this poor girl resembled his first and only love of his life. The same wavy brown hair that cascaded down below her shoulders. The same huge gray eyes, which had a unique ability to acquire a rare blue tint in moments of happiness. The same snow-white, almost porcelain skin. Rosendo could have sworn it was as soft and velvety as her mother's. "And you, what's your name?" The surgeon asked the girl, trying to control himself with all his might. Lucha Torres, the young mother-to-be answered, still looking at him with puzzlement. "So, did you know my mother or not?" Santiago felt his eyes fill with hot tears. The painful images of his past began to appear before his eyes. There was as much joy and love in it as suffering and disappointment. Santiago Rosendo met Lucrecia Torres in the cafeteria. He was in his 5th year of medical university, dreaming of a career as a cardiac surgeon. In between classes, Rosendo and his friends often stopped by one small but cozy cafeteria, which was located a couple of blocks away from their university. There, in the checkout line, he saw her for the first time, a girl with a waterfall of brown hair and deep sky-colored eyes. "Are you going to take the pies?" Rosendo asked the girl standing ahead of him, cautiously looking at the last 2 pies on the pastry case. "It depends on the filling," the stranger said, smiling. "For example, if it's with potatoes or onions and eggs, then definitely no. But if it's with chicken or jam, then I want it." "Thank God." Rosendo sighed with relief. "With potatoes. I didn't think that medical students would be so interested in the fate of baked goods." The beauty joked, laughing loudly. Rosendo felt as if someone poured boiling water on him. "How do you know?" The student asked, amazed by the girl's observation. She only smiled slyly in response. "Well, it's simple. Medical students always smell of all kinds of medicines. If the windows were not open, we could suffocate." The girl laughed again, and Rosendo thought that he was ready to listen to the sound of her voice forever. That same day, the young people returned home from classes together. Young Santiago offered to walk the girl to her neighborhood. Lucrecia studied at college as a seamstress. She knew a lot about fabrics and making the right silhouettes in clothes. And she really hoped that someday she could become a real fashion designer. Rosendo was very impressed by the girl's cheerfulness and purposefulness. He didn't even notice how he fell in love with her. Fortunately, Lucrecia Torres reciprocated the guy's feelings, and the fire of a real all-consuming passion instantly erupted between them. Lucrecia loved Rosendo's funny stories, and she really wanted him to achieve everything he had planned for himself for the next few years. The only dark spot in the girl's life was her parents. It so happened that the future seamstress grew up in a family of alcoholics. Her mother drank too much alcohol, and sometimes she even sold her own body to get a few more bottles of alcohol and some food. Lucrecia had no father, only a stepfather. He was also an alcoholic, but he also had a gambling addiction. Eventually, it got to the point where Lucrecia's parents sold absolutely everything. There was only one empty closet left in their house. At first, the girl tried to control her mother's addiction and even worked part-time as a dressmaker's assistant in a local atelier, trying to inspire her parents to return to normal life by her example. However, very soon Lucretia realized that alcohol on the table and money for gambling are much more important to her parents, and they consider their daughter only as the sole breadwinner. The girl didn't want to tolerate this way of life and left her parents, moving in with her grandmother, who warmly welcomed her granddaughter. She also tried to help her daughter recover from her addiction. But all her attempts ended in the same way. Lucretia's mother controlled herself for a couple of weeks, tried to avoid alcohol, and sometimes even kicked her husband out. But her willpower failed her every time, and the woman had one glass of alcohol, then another, and it would start all over again. Rosendo didn't know about his girlfriend's relatives for a long time. However, someone had already managed to provide all the information to the parents of the future surgeon. Naturally, his father and mother were adamantly against communication between their son and the daughter of alcoholics. Therefore, when Rosendo happily informed them that he wanted to introduce his future fiancée to them, Laurencia and Antonio accepted the news without joy. "Forget about Lucretia, son. Her mother is a prostitute." Laurencia Flores tried to talk Rosendo out of it. "What will people think of us? How will we be able to look others in the eye? But you don't even know her." Rosendo protested in response. "Besides, I'm not going to marry her parents, I'm going to marry Lucretia. Please, give us a chance, let me introduce her to you. Lucretia is an amazing girl, not like her parents." "Listen to me, Rosendo," his father said sternly. "No one is arguing that Lucretia is a good girl. She may be a good girl, but only now, while she's still young. But as the years go by, her bad blood will manifest. And there's nothing you can do about that heredity, son. You know, it's science." "Your father is right," Mom nodded in agreement. "Think about it, what will you give your children through such genes? It's nonsense." Rosendo felt his blood boiling in his veins from indignation. "You can say what you want, but I will marry only Lucretia and no one else." With these words, the guy slammed his fist on the table as hard as he could and ran out of his parents' house. That evening, Rosendo and Lucretia were sitting on the roof of the 9-story building where the girl lived with her grandmother. The summer breeze lightly flooded Lucretia's beautiful hair, making it shimmer with mysterious brown shades in the light of street lamps. The young people wrapped themselves in a huge blanket and silently enjoyed the beauty of the June night. The future surgeon took out a small velvet box from his pocket and solemnly handed it to the girl. When she opened it, she saw an elegant silver pendant in the shape of a dove and a silver chain gleaming in the evening light. "What is it?" Lucretia asked, surprised and a little embarrassed. "It will be a symbol of our eternal fidelity to each other," Rosendo said, breathless with excitement, and pulled back the collar of his shirt. He had exactly the same pendant. "My goodness, it's so beautiful." Lucretia smiled happily. Rosendo put the chain around the girl's neck and then kissed her gently. "Lucretia, I just need a couple more months to finish my studies, and that's it. I promise we'll get married as soon as I graduate. Of course, it won't be easy at first, especially with accommodation. But I'm sure I'll be sent to some distant city for an internship. So they'll provide me with a place to live. Everything will be okay, Lucretia. Just trust me." "Oh, Rosendo, you're such a dreamer." The girl laughed back. "What am I going to do in that distant city? I still have one more year of studying. We'll arrange a transfer to another college for you," the boy promised seriously. "I'll talk to the right people. My father has great connections. You will definitely be transferred. And," Rosendo added, smiling, "maybe even with a scholarship." The young people remembered that night for the rest of their lives because it was the happiest night of their lives. But suddenly everything came to an end. About a week after this fateful conversation, Lucretia suddenly disappeared. Her young fiancé looked for her everywhere, in the house of her drunken parents, in her grandmother's apartment, at her college. But he could not find her. Grandmother told Rosendo that Lucretia suddenly packed her belongings and left, but the girl didn't say anything about where and why she was going. The sewing college could not help the guy either. Lucretia disappeared without leaving a single clue as to where to look for her. A week later, Rosendo's parents called him for another serious conversation. They told him that they saw Lucretia with some local guy riding a motorcycle. He had taken her somewhere far to the north of the country. So there was no point in looking for Rosendo's unfaithful fiancée anymore. As proof, his father gave his son a letter. This letter was allegedly written by his beloved. She wrote that she was leaving this city forever and asked the future surgeon to never look for her or bother her. Rosendo remembered how the world had turned black and red for him then. Hate and jealousy were all he felt at that terrible moment. Believing his parents, the boy immersed himself in his studies. And, brilliantly graduating, he continued to study further, combining his studies with an internship in one of the most prestigious hospitals in the capital. Only now, reading the materials that the detective sent him, Rosendo realized he was cruelly deceived by his parents. Lucretia never met any motorcyclist. She was told that Rosendo has another, much more promising fiancé. So, the promising seamstress has to stay away from one of the most respected families in the city. A heartbroken Lucretia had to move to another city, and Rosendo was soon introduced to Olga, who was a more favorable match for him. As a result, a promising marriage became years of mental and physical captivity for the surgeon. So the parents of the young doctor involuntarily managed to ruin several lives at once. As Rosendo has now learned, the fate of Lucretia Torres was very tragic. The girl found out that she was pregnant after moving to another city, where she didn't have any friends or relatives. Adaptation to a new place was very hard for Lucretia. The girl constantly felt unwell and, eventually, she had to stay in the local hospital for the rest of her pregnancy. Unfortunately, a difficult pregnancy and childbirth severely affected her health. Lucretia gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, but 2 years later she died of cancer. Santiago's fiancé faded away in just a few months and no one could help her anymore. She named the girl Lucia, and Lucretia considered the 2 years she spent together with her to be the happiest in her short life. All this time Lucretia tried to work part-time as a seamstress at home, doing small repairs of clothes. And all this time she never gave up her dream of someday becoming a fashion designer. Alas, the evil fate had other plans. After her mother's death, Lucia was placed in an orphanage, where the girl spent her entire childhood and adolescence with almost no memories of Lucretia, except for those that she could learn from her mother's neighbors. However, the girl remembered the warmth and love that her tired and sick mother gave her. That's why after leaving the orphanage the girl immediately found her mother's grave. Lucia got a job as a cook in a small canteen in the business district. She used her first money to tidy up the grave, and from then on she regularly made sure her mom's final resting place was clean and tidy. However, Lucia's quiet life began to take dangerous turns similar to Lucretia's tragic fate. Just like her mother, the girl met her future boyfriend in the canteen, and he turned out to be the son of a powerful man. The guy was studying in London and came for a summer vacation. They quickly fell in love with each other. However, unlike Rosendo, the rich guy was in no hurry to propose to his beloved. Alas, she was only a beautiful toy for him, a way to have fun in the boring homeland. Their relationship quickly went too far. Soon, Lucia found out that she was pregnant and she immediately told her boyfriend about it. Obviously, he didn't want to hear anything about the baby and offered the girl money to get rid of the baby. The guy immediately decided to return to London. But before that, he invited the girl for a conversation. No, he didn't offer her help, he threatened her. During the argument, the guy promised the girl that if she told his parents about it, she could no longer hope for a quiet, normal life and work in this city. Lucia was not a timid person. After her boyfriend came back to England, the girl dared to talk to his parents. And this was her fatal mistake. The family of government officials, sensing from a mile away a possible scandal, did everything to ruin the girl's life and career. From now on, she was denied even the simplest non-prestigious work everywhere, up to the point that they did not even let her wash the floors. So, Lucha quickly found herself below the poverty line. And now, with no money at all, she had to wander the streets of the city, looking for food. And there was no way for her to leave this city. Santiago listened to his daughter's story, and couldn't hold back a horse sob. He decided to find his fiancée only now. A few months ago, his dying father, Antonio Santiago, finally confessed that he and his wife had committed that monstrous deception and ruined the young couple's life. Rosendo could not believe it, but when his father provided some convincing facts to prove it, the surgeon did not doubt that he was telling the truth. After his father's funeral, Santiago immediately began to look for a suitable private detective and, choosing Ferrer's agency, he risked to pay a lot of money in advance. He hoped to find at least something about the fate of his first and only love. To be honest, the surgeon didn't expect that in this dark and twisted past, the detective would not only find Lucretia's grave, but also give him the gift of meeting his daughter, because Santiago had lost all hope that he could ever be a father. "Why are you crying, Rosendo?" a surprised Lucha asked. She thought that the man who had helped her out in that awkward situation was just an old acquaintance of her late mother. "I'm crying because I finally found my real family," the surgeon said without holding back his tears. "Lucha, the thing is that your mother and we wanted to get married. But the circumstances. I'll tell you everything later, but I am really guilty." "Guilty?" the girl questioned warily. "Guilty of what?" "I couldn't take care of my daughter." "Lucha, I'm your biological father. I know, it sounds crazy right now, but it's true. I hope you can forgive me someday and accept my help." Knocking down the water bottle, the girl rushed to hug her father without saying a word. She squeezed him in her arms and, despite her big belly, pressed herself against him as tightly as she could. Daddy. I knew you would find me someday. Even when everyone else said otherwise, I always believed. Always." The girl pulled away from Rosendo's cheek, wet with tears, and tugged back the edge of her old sweatshirt. Santiago covered his mouth with his hand in shock. The pendant that had once been a symbol of their fidelity and love sparkled around the girl's neck. The man also silently pulled back the collar of his sweater. He's been wearing the same pendant for years. Lucha, seeing the same silver dove, laughed joyfully, and at that moment her eyes were colored with a light blue shade. She had the same unique beautiful eyes as her mother. A few months later, Lucha gave birth to a healthy, robust boy, and Rosendo named him Ives. Ives was a true gift of fate for his grandfather. The brisk, blonde-haired boy reminded Santiago both of himself as a child and of his beloved Lucretia. The boy inherited from his mother and grandmother the same big gray eyes. Rosendo bought a spacious apartment for Lucha not far from his neighborhood so that he could see his daughter and grandson every day. The young mother was insanely grateful to her father and did her best to make sure that her father never stopped feeling the family care and sincere love of his daughter. Later, when Ives was a little older, Lucha got a job as a real sous chef in one of the best restaurants in the capital. That same year, they sent her on a short-term internship in Los Angeles, where she learned all the secrets of real Hollywood cuisine. And, of course, the girl didn't forget to please her father with incredible meals. He had forgotten what it was like to spend evenings with instant noodles in the company of only his faithful dog Chaplin. Now life was filled with completely different colors. A year later, Santiago's daughter met a great guy who was an intern at Rosendo's department. The young people liked each other, and after a while real feelings sparked between them, resulting in a lavish wedding in French style, which was celebrated in the restaurant where Lucha worked. Her husband loved Ives and accepted him as his son. Now, while the young couple were enjoying their honeymoon, Rosendo spent all his time with his grandson. Little Ives could play for hours with his grandfather's shaggy dog without getting tired. It was because this child was the first in the Santiago family for the last 2 generations who was surrounded by real love and care. And so, this boy had every chance to change the karma of the whole family for the better.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.